Howdy folks, this is CowTipper Vern again. Today I'm going to talk about talking about 2x2s. I wanted to do an episode about what it's like to talk about professing, being raised professing, the religious beliefs and things like that, and why it's just so difficult. A few months ago, the therapist I was seeing got a new job, and it was in a different area, and I wasn't able to see this therapist anymore. And the therapist referred me on to somebody else. And that next therapist was great also, but I was immediately overwhelmed with having to describe 2x2 culture again, describe my own life, my own upbringing, my own experience, my own beliefs. Starting over again was really difficult, especially because with the previous therapist I'd gone to for a couple of years, I feel like I still had never really been able to describe adequately what I wanted to describe. And it felt like to even get to the issues I wanted to talk about, there was so much groundwork that needed to be done. It was really overwhelming. I've heard this from a lot of people, that they're intimidated even by the idea of going to therapy because how do you explain everything to somebody new? And the thought occurred to me, maybe that's the problem. My first thought is always, how can I describe it better? How can I simplify everything down to squeeze it into the first few appointments? Therapy can be expensive for a lot of people, and having to spend the first several appointments just explaining background and trying to help the person understand what you're going through and what you're thinking and how you're feeling about it can be pretty difficult. And I thought that maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe just describing that problem would be helpful. Maybe when you meet a new therapist or a new friend or you're dating or something like that, maybe trying to put the 2x2s into a couple short little sentences isn't even possible. Maybe describing why describing them is difficult would be helpful. So this episode is about that. I thought of a few different ways that describing 2x2s is made so difficult. And I thought maybe even using those as a place to start might be helpful. First of all, just describing them at all is made very, very difficult because of the structure of 2x2s and the 2x2 belief system. I believe it's on purpose, and maybe describing that would be helpful. Another thing is introspection is very, very difficult when you're raised in a group like this. So starting out therapy and trying to be introspective, trying to describe things and then be introspective about it is very difficult too. And then downstream of those issues is the issues around boundaries, how professing people have very unhealthy ideas around boundaries. So having to learn boundaries as an adult, having to learn how to be introspective, all while describing something as nebulous as 2x2 culture, can make therapy very difficult and can even make interpersonal relationships very difficult with people who don't understand it. So this episode is going to be about that. This episode isn't going to be describing it better. It's going to be describing how hard it is to describe and how that affects us. I often hear of people who've left meetings and for 20, 30 years, never talk to anybody about it because it's just too difficult. You can't just talk to somebody and say, this is how I was raised. I was raised kind of like this, because there's nothing quite like it. There's a lot of things that are similar, and we'll talk about those, but there's nothing quite like it. And I think there might be some value in just talking about that. So that's what I'm going to do today. Today, I'm just going to talk about why it is that we feel so overwhelmed by the idea of describing our own upbringing, the traditions, the culture, how it affected us, how we feel about it, and why we struggle so much in places like therapy. First, I'm going to talk about why it's hard to examine the 2x2s in a meaningful way. Second, I'm going to talk about how it's hard to examine ourselves because we struggle with introspection due to our upbringing. And then I'm going to talk about why it's difficult to examine our interactions with other people and understand boundaries and set boundaries for ourselves. And maybe if I can wrap my mind around why this stuff is so difficult to examine and to describe, then maybe I can back into meaningful conversations about it. I'll see how this goes. Hopefully this is helpful. The first thing that makes 2x2s hard to talk about is that the religion itself is so different and so strange and so nebulous, so undefined, purposefully so. First of all, nobody's ever heard of us. That's a pretty obvious point, but it's a significant point because it's hard to draw comparisons. We often get confused with other groups, different Orthodox groups or apostolics or things. But that doesn't really do it. I often compare the 2x2 community to the Jehovah's Witness community because we have a lot of similar words, verbiage. We treat each other similarly. Our community runs very similar. But the beliefs aren't very similar. The beliefs are pretty different. It's strange to have such different beliefs, but such similar verbiage. My wife and I went on a Jehovah's Witness podcast several months ago, and maybe I'll put that down in the links below, because the comparisons are really interesting, and it made for a great conversation, but it's not quite the same thing. We also have workers that are kind of like missionaries for the LDS Church, but the LDS Church does it for a couple of years and then moves on, and we do it forever. Our workers go out for the rest of their lives, or so they believe when they start. So that's not quite the same thing. And we don't have any big buildings like temples, so that's not similar. But there's some cultural similarities that make the deconstruction process similar. The one I think that's interesting is we're so similar to apostolics in how we dress and how we talk. A lot of our culture is the same. But apostolics have electric guitars, so their worship songs are way better. Imagine if you went to a convention and really rocked out and really praised and jumped up and down. That is more like apostolic. They have way more fun than we have. So it's hard to really draw a comparison. There's no proximate comparison for what a 2x2 is. There's just a lot of little subtle similarities to other groups, but considering the fact that nobody knows who we are, those little similarities are more of a distraction than they are an actual help in describing us. We don't know anything about ourselves. We don't know our own history. If you've left and you've started researching and learning about William Irvine and stuff, then you'll know that there is a history. There's a really good book out there called Preserving the Truth by Cherie Kropp-Ehrig. Everyone should buy it. Everyone should read it. I'll mention it often. But we don't really know our history because it's not taught to us. The workers now speak highly of workers that went before them and spread the gospel, but that only goes back a couple generations, and they don't really talk about what happened before that. Some of them will even say, hey, these brothers came over from Ireland, and they were young, and they were spreading the gospel and doing a great work, blah, blah, blah. God moved these people, blah, blah, blah. God touched the hearts of these young men and brought the gospel over from Ireland or whatever. But they don't say where they got it. They just don't talk about it. And we were raised just not talking about it. So it makes it very difficult to describe. Another thing that's difficult to describe are our own beliefs. I'm not going to talk about the individual beliefs because we don't have a really well-articulated set of beliefs. We don't have a doctrine. We don't have articles of faith, anything like that. But not only that, we didn't grow up talking about it. We never sat around talking about our beliefs in God and what those actually meant in our day-to-day lives. We talked a little bit about the rules, like not having a TV and wearing a skirt if you're a woman. We didn't talk a lot about the actual beliefs. We had no writings to lean on, none at all, no publications. And we never evangelized because of it. I often say we're part of an evangelical Protestant tradition, but we're not really. Our workers say they're going to the harvest field to spread seed and spread the gospel to needy souls or whatever. But they don't really do that. The gospel's barely ever spread. Most of the preaching is done to people who are already in meetings, people who are professing already. Workers rarely ever contact anyone and bring them to meetings, spread the gospel publicly. More of that responsibility to bring new people to the meetings is on the friends, explicitly so in some cases. I have letters from workers telling us that it was our job to do that when we were in meetings. So it makes our beliefs really hard to articulate because we never actually did it. We don't have an elevator pitch. We don't have a business card that explains what we do. We don't have that little one-page summary. Most religions have little cards you can hand out or books you can hand out to show what you believe, but we didn't do that because our beliefs were just in us, I guess. They were just in the Bible. We said that, well, we just follow the Bible. Well, we didn't. I mean, you can sit there all day and find places where the things we did were just our own interpretations of the Bible that were unique entirely to us. So the result is that we've always avoided talking about it. We've always avoided telling people. And that makes our language very limited. So when we go into therapy and are trying to describe this group we were raised in, we can't really start with the beliefs because they don't make any sense. All we can do is talk about, well, they're kind of like this, but kind of like this. And I couldn't play sports, and I couldn't follow an interest. Our language is really limited because we just didn't use it. We didn't grow up using it. We didn't talk about our beliefs a lot because because they were very uncomfortable to talk about. The other complication to that is that 2x2s have a very strange way of using language. We grew up with a very strange vocabulary, using words in ways that weren't common to anybody else. Even words just like love, fear, and peace didn't mean what anybody else would say when they meant them. 2x2s could say love and be an absolute jerk to somebody. We could say fear and even read the word fear in the Bible, but then we would explain that it meant respect, not really fear. We felt fear, we had fears, but we never acknowledged them. And I'll get more into our detachment from our emotions later. We would say the word peace, but that didn't mean we were peaceful. It didn't mean we had peace. It didn't mean we were happy. It didn't mean contentment. It didn't mean any of that. It meant we were doing what the workers told us. Even some words for real practical things like testimony. It wasn't until I left meeting that I realized that we use the word testimony a little bit different in meetings. Testimony was just when we got up and talked about stuff in meeting. For most churches, testimony means the story of how you met the gospel and came to church or whatever. So there's a lot of little words that don't quite make any sense, and those can trip you up when you're in therapy or even just talking to friends when you use words that don't quite mean the same thing to the other person. You always have to watch out for those things. All of this inability to describe how we were raised is complicated by the fact that we've always done it this way. The vast majority of professing people were born into it. We literally don't know another way. Very few people found meetings later in life or found the workers and have anything to compare to, have a previous religious life or have a previous life at all. All the complications in explaining how we were raised, all the complications in explaining our belief system are complicated more by the fact that we don't have another way. We don't have any other verbiage at all. We've always just understood what to do based entirely on following the authority of the workers and peer pressure of all the friends around us. We've never had to articulate anything we believe or the purpose behind anything we do. We've just done it because we know we have to. Luckily, there are tons of articles and podcasts out now that kind of talk about the 2x2s as a group. And those work pretty well. You can hand those to therapists. They explain things well enough. There's more of those all the time. You can even give them some of these episodes if you wanted to. But it doesn't explain what it did to us. It doesn't explain our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs deep down. There's a difference between a belief that Jesus came to earth and told workers to go 2 and 2, and beliefs about yourself because of all this. You can say that you believed in God and you believed in workers and you believed in meetings. You can say, I believed in God, I believed in workers, I believed in meeting in homes and not saying bad words. But it's hard to be more introspective than that, and I'm going to talk about that next. There's a tendency for us when we're first talking to somebody about our belief system that we were raised with to talk about the nuts and bolts and the everyday practices and things like that, but that doesn't really mean anything to a lot of people. It's because we're describing what it was, but not what it meant to us. And it meant everything to us. It was everything. 2x2 culture is all-encompassing. It's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that is supposed to bring us happiness. It'll definitely bring us salvation, even if it never brings us happiness. It brings us joy, but that's not really happy. And it shouldn't be, and it doesn't have to be. But we're taught from a very early age that it's the only way to salvation, the only way to eternal salvation, heaven, as it were. It's the only good thing. But practicing it was very vague and nebulous and based entirely on peer pressure and authority. So we had a hard time wrapping our minds around it, and we were afraid to do so because to do so would be to doubt, and we don't want to have any doubt. The obvious problem with having a system we live under be the only thing that matters and the only thing that we should care about, but we can't describe it and we don't understand it, is that it complicates our ability to think about ourselves. We are subservient to the system. We're part of the system, and the system is what matters, not us. And that creates an issue with introspection. It makes it very, very hard for us to describe ourselves and understand ourselves. And that's what I want to talk about next. For next 2x2, introspection is challenging because we've always been told not to do it. We struggle with having access to our own internal voice because our external voice has always been punished. Stopping your external voice so you can make somebody more like the rest of the crowd and making that a condition of acceptance makes the internal voice shut itself off. Our external voice has been punished since the very beginning. Like I've mentioned before, most of us were born into it. So when we're babies, we're taught to be quiet in meetings, and that's really valued. Parents with really quiet kids are praised nonstop. Oh, your kids are so great. They were so attentive in meeting. They were so quiet. It's really common, especially in the past few generations, to spank kids in meeting. And it's not just that corporal punishment was done, it was encouraged by workers who've never had to parent kids. Workers who thought that children were better if they were quiet, and parents were better parents if the children were quiet too. Spanking is such a thing in the 2x2s that little kids often, when they were playing with each other, would play meeting, and that consisted almost entirely of spanking baby dolls. It's a big deal. The idea that you had to silence your kids was one of the first things you heard as a parent. Phrases like, you need to break their will. Things like encouraging parents to break the will of their children taught parents early on that the kids having a will was a bad thing. And over time, when you've punished that external voice to the point that it can't be accessed at all, the internal voice just starts to match it. As you get older, every form of exploration is punished as well. Right up to and including having friends at school, joining clubs, doing social things, on into college, dating, even going to college at all. Any exploration of personality and discovery of an internal voice was punished and pathologized as an excuse for sin, a sinful nature. Again, with the world, flesh, and the devil thing, one of our biggest enemies was the flesh. Whatever was in us, we were taught from a very early age that whatever is in us is evil. Anything that contradicts the workers, really, was evil. Now, of course, they say it contradicts God, and it's our human nature that needs to die, and we need to die to sin and all this stuff, but really it was our voice needs to match the worker's voice. That meant we don't have a voice. It meant we just mimicked. So we've never gotten comfortable talking about ourselves. I've always struggled with talking about myself or even accessing what I really feel. I've always had a hard time describing my own hobbies and my own views on things. And I think I've probably overcorrected later in life. Those of you who know me personally probably think that none of this is true because I never shut up about stuff. I might be overcorrecting, I'll be honest. But I think all of us deal with this in a different way. And when I say all of us, I mean all of us. I'm not talking about my upbringing. I'm talking about all of our upbringings. We learn from day one that our flesh is evil and that our hearts are evil and the thoughts of our hearts are evil continually and they're bad and sinful, and we have to be careful of our thoughts. I talked in the Bite Model episodes about how our thoughts were pathologized and beaten down and subjugated, and our emotions were too. And when you do that for enough people, and when you do that from an early enough age, it silences your internal voice. So when you're coming out of the 2x2s and go into therapy, or even just talking to friends or talking to dates or talking to your spouse about your upbringing, it's very hard to do because it's hard to access what you really think. There's an impulse to just mirror what you think should be said. There's an impulse to mirror, to parrot. There's an impulse to say what you think should be said, what others around you will find acceptable. The workers always thought they were leading us to God, but what they were leading us to do is say what they would approve of, was parroting them and mimicking them. They most approved of us when our voice mimicked theirs. And professing parents tend to do that to their kids as well, because of course they want to be approved of the workers as well. You want to be those parents with the kids who behave really well. Sit up in the front of the gospel meetings. Don't have to get hauled out and spanked. Sing the hymns wholeheartedly. Have a great testimony in meeting. Parents love when their young children, 6, 7, 8 years old, profess and start having a part in the meetings. That's not really their part, though. 6, 7, 8 years old, those ages mimic really well. They mimic the adults around them. I'm sure every kid's different, and I'm no psychologist, but at that age, the kids just want to make the parents happy. As a parent, that seems apparent to me. Our internal voice from a very early age is secondary to the furtherance of the way, the furtherance of the truth and the ministry. And it's not in service of God. If we ever said something or did something and said, I'm doing this because it's of God, but it didn't match what the workers said, it would not be accepted. It wouldn't be accepted by workers, parents, elders, friends, family. No one would accept it. What's accepted is what the workers tell us. And that makes it very, very difficult to think for ourselves. We're told not to think for ourselves, ever. We're told that thinking for ourselves is fleshly, it's giving into fleshly sin. The irony, of course, is that during the last few years, we've had a scandal breaking in the 2x2s, and the fleshly sin is being exposed, and no one's mentioning that part. No one mentions the fact that that just means the fact that maybe all of those people were just worshiping their own flesh. No one seems to mention that part. It seems like people are finding excuses for those people rather than holding them to account the way you would if a woman cut her hair. This double standard and hypocrisy is not lost on all the people who've left. So when you learn that feelings are not okay and your own internal thoughts are not okay, you're not used to accessing them. When you don't access yourself and you don't honor your internal voice and feel like your internal voice is sin, you never really discover yourself. In fact, I've heard workers preach against the ideas of discovering yourself or finding yourself. That's always considered an excuse to sin. And understanding what you want and understanding what has meaning and value to you is always pathologized as sin, is always blown off as an excuse to sin. So if a therapist asks us how something makes us feel, we automatically check with ourselves to see whether the feeling we have is acceptable. That's hard to do. Our internal voice is something else. And it takes a long time and a lot of therapy and a lot of thought and care and patience with ourselves to even understand what we think. We're completely tuned out of our own body. We're completely tuned out of our own instincts. Our internal voice is turned off. There's a lot of sad parts to this, but the saddest part to me is that this leads to a diminished sense of self. We minimize ourselves completely and we mask. We mask to make it look like we're matching the surroundings. We play a role to make sure we're accepted by everyone around us. We have a hard time standing up for ourselves. And you can see how scandal has broken among the 2x2s when you have raised a bunch of children to not stand up for themselves and to not be in touch with their internal ideas or desires or values. And then you have a bunch of workers who speak for God telling them what to do. The scandal that's going on right now is an obvious one. I'm not going to get into the CSA scandal anymore on this episode, but I think that puzzle solves itself. We're really, really good at following norms because the norms around us are what dictated everything we did. And we're really good at following them, not just for our own safety, but for the safety of everyone else. We don't want to be a stumbling block to somebody else. When we're following the norms and everyone else is following the norms, we follow the norms so we don't offend anybody or cause a stumbling block, quote unquote, and everyone else is doing that too. We're all mimicking each other. We're all mirroring each other. And anyone who doesn't mirror correctly is considered sinful and evil. And we don't talk to them anymore. They're a stumbling block. They're offensive. Nothing could be worse than being an offense to somebody. When everyone around us is doing this and we're discouraged from even making friends with people in the world, we don't have any good examples of self-introspection and mental health. We just have a lot of people standing around mimicking and living in fear that if any of their own personal ideas come up, they'll be sinful and they'll be cast out. Even if we have some of our own ideas and we're comfortable with them, we don't feel like we're sinful. We're so worried about making someone else sin and sending someone else toward death that we self-censor. We're constantly worried about our effect on others, so we push ourselves down constantly so as to keep the peace. And the problem that comes from this is a misunderstanding of boundaries, a lack of ability to understand boundaries. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. It's not just that we have a hard time describing the 2x2s in a functional sense, and it's not just that we have a hard time accessing our own voice and our own desires and our own values. We also struggle with boundaries and trust. All three of these things make therapy challenging. The boundaries thing is unfortunate. In the 2x2 culture, boundaries are all over the place. Nobody knows where the lines are. I've already mentioned that we mask a lot. We mask because we're supposed to. We're supposed to not acclimate to our surroundings. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. But we're in the world, and that's really hard to detangle. We develop a lack of trust early on because we are told that we can't be of the world. We have to be in the world, but we can't trust anybody in the world. We can only trust people who are in the way. We can trust workers, we can trust elders, and we can trust professing family, and only professing family, not even unprofessing family, by and large. So we're taught to trust based entirely on the credentials of the person. If they're professing, if they're godly, quote unquote, we can trust them. If they're not godly, we can't trust them. Again, with the CSA scandal, a lot of people trusted workers and elders that hurt them and didn't trust people who could have helped them. This is a very unhealthy culture. When we're in the world but not of the world, we want to look normal, and we kind of do, in some ways. And in the ways that we don't, that actually helps sometimes. When you're a 2x2 and you're in the world but not of the world, especially if you're a woman, you wear a bun and a skirt and all that stuff, that actually kind of runs interference for you. So while you're professing, it shows everyone in the world that you're not one of them, and it gives you a little bit of a barrier you kind of need to maintain for your own mental health. When 2x2s leave meetings and try to tell other people about it or try to talk to therapists, that barrier is gone, and it's actually a little bit difficult. It's hard to explain to a therapist why you feel so different. I've already mentioned that it's hard to describe the 2x2s, and it's hard to access your own voice. It's also hard without that artificial boundary of your dress and professing itself. Without that boundary, it's actually hard to address somebody that's now of the world, but you're part of the world too. When you're now part of the world, that feels wrong to you for a very long time. It still feels wrong to me in a lot of ways. It feels like I should be special somehow. I'll be honest, sometimes I miss that feeling of specialness. That without doing anything, just by being who I am, born how I was born, I'm a little bit special. And I don't have that now. So that boundary is gone, that barrier is gone. I can't just flash my figurative 2x2 card and say I'm in God's one true way anymore. But I'm also not in the world, so I don't know where the boundaries are. It's very hard without the mask of professing. When you're professing and you know you're separate from the world, being professing is your competence. And you feel competent because of it. You feel competent in your way, whatever that is. Maybe it's not competent in the world. Maybe you're not functional in the world. But in meetings, you are. In the professing world, you are. You're doing the right things. You're getting people's approval. So now that you're out in the world, it feels very exposed. And when you already can't describe where you came from and you already can't describe yourself, it feels like you don't know where the boundaries are anymore. And you don't know how to build up your own boundaries. And you're having to decide a lot of this stuff on the fly. You're having to describe this all to yourself on the fly. When we've been raised with the same boundaries our whole lives, we have a hard time developing other boundaries. It's hard to create your own. And some of that has to do with the whole concept of locus of control. And I'm not going to go into that a lot, but it's an interesting concept to think about. To understand for the first time that you have the control, the boundaries you set, the things that you accept in your life and the people you accept and on what terms is now your own responsibility. No worker can tell you to do it. We're so used to fitting in rather than taking up space that taking up space in the world feels very uncomfortable. And it's hard to know where exactly to draw those lines. Boundaries are important because trust is important. When you go into therapy, you have to trust your therapist, otherwise you're not going to get anything out of it. But how do you know to trust them? They're worldly. Resetting a boundary to know when to trust somebody is very, very difficult. And I think it would make sense to tell a therapist that. If you do trust a therapist, or a friend, or a significant other, it's worthwhile to just note explicitly that you struggle with that, in my opinion. That setting boundaries is a moving target a little bit. You might do it wrong a few times. You might hurt someone's feelings. You might back away from somebody prematurely. You might trust someone and then have to pull your trust back. Because you're learning on the fly. We all are. Those boundaries have been set for us for a very long time, since birth. And having to set them for the first time on our own is very difficult. And therapy can help with that, but we have to trust the therapist first. We've been hardwired to trust a group that was abusive. We were hardwired from the time we were born to trust people that could have been abusive and distrust people who could have helped us, entirely based on the beliefs of the people involved. We've literally spent our entire lives trusting people who are unaccountable and haven't earned trust. We've never made people earn trust. Making people earn your trust is a process in and of itself. holding people to account is very uncomfortable because we've never had that authority in our life either. It's hard to hold people accountable, and it's hard to hold ourselves accountable in certain ways too. It was much easier inside. It was much more comfortable in the 2x2s to just follow what someone told us to do, to just dress the right way, to show up every Sunday, to not have any special thoughts, never talk about our real intentions, never discover our values, and don't even bother trying to describe the 2x2s. Just keep following. Follow like a sheep. Jesus first, others second, yourself way last. And what that turns into, of course, is ignoring yourself. Now that you've centered yourself a little bit and trying to figure out where you belong in life, that's difficult to do. And your relationship to other people is going to be confusing. It's something I've had to learn a lot about on the fly, and I'm still learning. I'm still understanding that this is difficult for me. If healthy boundaries were a concept among the 2x2s, the CSA scandal that they're suffering right now would alarm them more. We didn't have that concept when we were professing. We didn't have the concept of healthy boundaries. We were taught from very early on that we shouldn't have them. We gave other people rights to every part of our life. We even sang in meeting, our life is not our own. Our very life, the life that we have, is not our own. Now, theologically, we could say we belong to God, but in meetings, that means you belong to the ministry. You belong to the concept of going to meetings. You belong to the concept of being one of God's children in the way and the truth. That means going to meeting and following all the rules. We didn't have our own life. We had a professing life. We owed that to someone else. Learning to have healthy boundaries after being raised like that is very confusing and a lot of work. And therapy is great for that. I've sat with a few therapists now, and it's taken a while for me to really be honest with them. Not because I'm holding anything back or trying to be dishonest, but because I don't exactly know how yet. I've never been a dishonest person, I don't think. I've always hoped that I'm an honest person. And I was taught that honesty was a value. But accessing your honesty and accessing your internal voice is impossible as a 2x2. It's impossible in a high control group. The high control group suffers when people are individuals. Every time I've gone to a therapist, I've tried to describe the 2x2s, and it doesn't really click. And what I'm realizing is the reasons for that are everything I've talked about so far. It's hard to describe anyway. It's hard to describe what I want. And it's hard to understand my own boundaries. And all of that is a work in progress. So maybe nothing in this episode will make therapy any easier, but maybe it'll make our struggles more understandable. Maybe we'll have some compassion on ourselves as we struggle to figure out what to do with ourselves next. One final thought about therapy post 2x2. I don't have any advice, but I have a few thoughts. This discussion comes up in my support group sometimes, and I think there's valid points on all sides. One of the questions that comes up is, how do I find a therapist that understands the 2x2s? It's just too hard to describe. And I completely understand that. That's the point of this episode. I have a couple different thoughts. I have two contradictory thoughts about that. I've always enjoyed having therapists that weren't religious, or at least not overtly religious. It wasn't part of their practice. It wasn't religious therapy. I've appreciated having therapists who give me natural responses to the things I say because I'm not sure what sounds crazy and what doesn't. I appreciate talking to a therapist and every once in a while seeing a raised eyebrow, a dropped jaw, frenzied scribbling on a notepad, because it helps me understand what I'm saying and the effect it has on people. So I've always preferred to not have a therapist that knows anything about the 2x2s. I'd rather describe it and get their natural reactions and their natural feelings about it, their professional feelings about it. On the other hand, I totally understand. This whole episode is about why it's so difficult to talk about being a 2x2. I totally understand when people say it's just too overwhelming. It's overwhelming to go in and try to explain why you feel like you're having a difficult time, why you're traumatized, perhaps, why you're struggling with your voice, why you're struggling with your boundaries, and trying to describe the 2x2s as you go. It's difficult. So I understand the tendency to want somebody who already understands. And I don't think that's the wrong thing to do. I think everyone needs to do what they're comfortable with. Being comfortable in therapy and trusting your therapist is a really important thing. But there's also one caveat to this discussion, and that is that many ex-2x2s are becoming therapists. I have personal friends who are studying to become therapists, because when they leave meetings and realize what they've been through and realize how they were raised, they really want to help other people. And I absolutely value that. So while I personally wouldn't choose an X2x2 therapist, that's not to say that I wouldn't in the future. I really admire people who are putting their experiences to use to help other people. In the future, I think there will be a lot of X2x2 therapists, a growing number all the time. And I think that's great. And they'll understand the trauma. They'll speak the language. They'll understand the difficulties with boundaries. They'll understand the difficulties with internal voice. And hey, they'll already know what a 2x2 is. Maybe that'll be good. All I can say is good luck to everybody as you recover, as you detangle, deconstruct, and try to find your own voice in all of this. Try to find what's valuable to you. Try to encourage other people, and try to heal from whatever wounds you have. I wish everyone the best. Thanks for listening to this. I hope some of it was helpful, or at least thought-provoking. And I'll catch you next time.